give confirmation that the quality and the quantity of coal that was delivered is confirmed. So the geologist will check the volumes that is invoiced in the quality sheet against what was recorded on our coal accounting system at the power station. The second two names is the management accountant and the financial advisor, and this team is responsible for the compilation of this invoice pack. So they will draft this cover sheet. They will make sure that the invoice attached is the correct invoice and it complies with all the requirements. They will affix for the signees a calculation sheet, and then any other supporting documents that might be required for a specific payment sheet. And then above that is the coal supply unit manager or the contract manager, in this case myself. And then above that is the coal supply manager, which is then my senior, and he will also sign it off. So the last two signatories is really the signatories authorizing the processing of this payment or correction, whatever it might be at that specific point.
And will payment control forms under coal supply agreements usually have all of those signatures appended to them?
They don't, yes, usually they do have. It depends on what type of transaction it is. If it is a transaction that only relates to transportation, the geologist will not sign because there is no qualities to be checked. And similarly for this processing, there was no qualities. It's a prepayment, so there's no qualities to be checked, and hence there was no signature on this control sheet from the geologist.
But there were at least the signatures at 422 of management accountant, financial advisor, coal supply unit manager, and coal supply manager. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Can we please compare that to who signed on page 432? First of all, please can you indicate whose name is indicated there as the authorizer?
It looks like Maya Bam or Bama.
And who was she?
She was in the Chief Procurement Officer office at that moment in time. I don't know exactly what position, but I know she was in that office.
And was it customary for payment control forms to be authorized by persons sitting in the procurement office?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. Mr. Opperman, I'd then like to...
Maybe let's go back to 422 under the authorized by column. There is no signature for the geologist, as you have indicated, and you have indicated that the reason for that is because there is no quality for him to check.
That's correct.
Now, this being a prepayment, was there anything for all the others to do for which they were signing?
Chair, the management accountant and the financial accountant would have been the people that process this payment. We now know, with this happening in May, that this is after the effect, almost like a month after the effect. So the signatories on this document on this specific day would not really have done anything. It was merely the transfer of funds from the Brac account to the Arnold or to the Optimum account, that agreement.
If the geologist had signed, he or she would have made a misrepresentation because there would have been no quality of coal to check, isn't it? Or not?
I don't think so. I don't even think they will get the payment document because there is nothing for them to check.
Yeah, but I'm saying if for whatever reason somebody had insisted that the geologist signs because the form makes provision for him or her to sign, and he or she agreed to sign, would it not have been a misrepresentation because signing here must have been, signing this form for the geologist must have been preceded by checking the quality of the coal?
Chair, I think it's a fair deduction to make. I can go with that deduction, yes.
So I'm wondering whether anyone else who did sign here wasn't actually doing something they were not supposed to do, because normally you are required to sign here because there has been genuine transaction services or coal delivered. I'm trying to check that.
Yeah, Chair, the signatories on this control sheet on this day was required to perform the transfer of these funds from the Brac contract to the Optimum contract. So the management accountant, my signature and my senior signature were required from a control point of view to have the records where the funds were transferred from the Brac contract where he was incorrectly paid a month earlier to the Arnott contract where it belongs and from which the monthly delivery volumes will be deducted as the coal was delivered over the next couple of months.
So your view is that for the others, their signatures, their signing was legitimate?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Opperman, if I can follow up on that. Let's go to page 432 to begin with. You said it was highly irregular for a person sitting in the procurement office and not the people responsible for the coal supply agreement themselves to sign authorization for this prepayment. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
It occurred on the 13th of April, the prepayment. We know that, correct?
That's correct.
Why could we not have waited for the correct people to sign the payment control form, which happened a month later?
Advocate Hofmeyer, I think with all respect, those people might not have signed it.
And why not?
Because it is irregular.
Yes. So there is a payment of R500 million that occurs on the 13th of April, authorized by someone who ordinarily would never authorize such a payment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it relates to alleged supply to Arnott Power Station, correct?
Correct.
But from the contract linked to Fantine, correct?
That's correct.
That was never supplying Arnott.
No.
And nonetheless, more than R500 million leaves Eskom and is paid into a Taketa bank account. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And a month later, Eskom tries to get its house in order. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it does so at page 422, whereas you've described it, the people who should have been approving this originally seek to rectify the situation, to attribute the payment to the correct contract and the correct power station. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it's an accounting exercise.
After the fact?
After the fact, yes.
Thank you. And that was to create the appearance of regularity. Is that correct?
I can't say if that is what it is. It was purely from a point of view that this money was deducted from a contract and then the coal will be delivered against a different contract. So from a accounting management point of view, you were sitting with two separate accounts that you will never be able to balance out. Plus, on the other hand, is that the Arnott agreement was, let's term it a short-term agreement, and the Brac agreement was an agreement that was signed for 10 years. So that funds or that expense could never remain under the Brac contract. It had to be corrected.
Mr. Opperman, I don't think we disagree. Do you accept that it was irregularly attributed to the Brac contract?
For sure.
And so you needed what happened at page 422 to regularize what had happened previously irregularly?
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. Opperman, I'd then like to take you to the Brac contract itself. I said that we were going to look in particular at the condition precedent there, and I'd also like to have your comment in relation to the coal specifications. I'd like you to move to Exhibit U4 for that purpose. You can put away U8 for now. And it will be file 4 of Exhibit U4. You will find
what page?
the coal supply agreement commences at page 856 of file 4 of U4. And the relevant clause I'd like to take you to first is the condition precedent. You'll find that at page 879. You'll see at the bottom of page 879 we have clause 10, which is headed conditions precedent. That clause reads as follows: the parties agree that this agreement will be subject to the fulfillment or waiver of the following conditions precedent. 10.2, in respect of the supplier, by no later than 1600 hours on 31 March 2015, the supplier had completed and reported a successful combustion test for coal supply to Majuba Power Station. Clause then goes on at 10.3. It is specifically recorded that if the conditions precedent are not fulfilled or waived on or prior to the applicable date referred to in clause 10.2.1, the remaining provisions of this agreement shall never become effective. In such event, neither party shall have any claim of any nature against the other. Mr. Opperman, is this a standard condition precedent in a coal supply agreement?
Chair, it's definitely not a standard condition. This was the first time that I ever saw anything like this, and I have managed multiple contracts. I think it's also supported through, if one just go to the index of this contract, one will see that item number 10 in this contract was labeled as qualities. Now, if one just turn the page and look at page 880, clause number 10 is still coal qualities. So this just is another example of poor drafting or formatting where a clause was just slipped in with the same numbering. So it is definitely not standard.
Mr. Opperman, we'll deal with Mr. Bester about the speed with which this contract had to be produced, which may explain why these clauses are inserted with the incorrect numbering. But for your purposes, you've confirmed this is not a standard condition precedent.
No, it's not.
I'd like to go back to your evidence a moment ago about the spheres of responsibility between fuel sourcing on the one hand, where you did not sit, and coal operations where you did sit. In the context of this contract and this condition precedent, which indicated that despite signature, which you will see occurred on the 10th of March, if you go to page 920,
Yes.
there was something that had to happen under this contract before it would become operative. Is that your understanding of clause 10?
Yes, yes.
And what was that?
There had to be a combustion test completed, and it also had to report that the combustion was successful to supply coal to Majuba Power Station.
By a very specific time on a very
Correct.
specific day.
Yes, 1600 on the 31st.
Who was responsible to confirm whether that took place?
At this moment of contracting, it will be a fuel sourcing function
Why is that?
because the contract has not been handed over. It's not in operation yet. It's a condition precedent. So before you can sign this agreement, this is a condition precedent. It's not a condition that needs to be put in place after the contract is signed and need to be complied with.
Well, I just want to make sure I understand. What's the purpose of a combustion test?
Chair, the combustion test is a process that we've got a pilot scale boiler in our test and research facilities. I think Mr. Mushy explained a little bit in his statement about it. But what we basically do, we take a sample of the coal that is representative of the coal supply that one typically will get, take that coal to the combustion rig, combust it, and from there look at the combustion characteristics of that coal. So this report will reflect on a lot of combustion specific parameters and not necessarily just the ash content and the CV and the AI and the normal specifications that we are used to. So once this report gets produced with these parameters like slagging propensities and burnout times and a lot of other aspects as well, that report will then be used to liaise with the power station for which this coal is destined to. The combustion specialist at the power station itself will then consult that report that was drafted by the combustion specialist at RT&D, and then based on that make a recommendation or accept the coal or accept it conditionally, whatever the case may be.
Does a combustion test help test the quality of the coal? Is it one of the steps aimed at testing the quality of the coal?
Yes, it does.
So, if a condition precedent is put into a contract that says a combustion test must be conducted first and an appropriate report must be made available, otherwise this agreement will not be operative. To me, as a layperson, that seems to say the parties regard the conducting of a combustion test as something quite essential, without which they should not proceed with the agreement. Is that the kind of thinking that people who work with these things would also think, or is that just because I'm a layperson on these things?
Chair, your deduction is perfectly correct. Performing a combustion test on a new source, like what this was, so this was a complete new mine, it's very standard in the process of negotiation and conducting a suitability test and determining where coal supply will go. So it is pretty standard.
Well, my questions arise from the fact that I understood you to be saying to Ms. Hofmeyer that it was not usual to have, as I understood you, this kind of condition precedent, or did I misunderstand you?
Chair, the point to be made is that it is very usual to do a combustion test before a contract gets signed. It is unusual to put a condition precedent in a contract to stipulate that by a certain date and time such a test need to be done. And I think what is more important is the sentence just below to say that the coal must be suitable for Majuba Power Station, and I think that is what makes it relevant.
Oh, okay. But you say what is normal would be the conducting of a combustion test before a contract is even signed.
That's correct, Chair.
But here, that provision was put into a contract, so the combustion test would be conducted after the signing of the contract.
Well,
in this case.
It seemed like it because the contract was signed on the 10th of March, and
yes.
between then and the 31st of March,
yes.
a test had to be done, yes.
Yes, so that's part of what you say is unusual.
Correct.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Just to follow up on the Chair's questions there, Mr. Opperman, we had evidence from Mr. Mushiho, and I'd like your comment on it because it sounds similar to what you are suggesting, that in the ordinary course of coal supply agreements, the source would have been tested and confirmed as suitable for the power station to which it was going to be delivered before the contract was signed. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct.
So that's in the ordinary course of events.
That's correct.
In this case, we have a contract signed on the 10th of March, at which time there had been no successful combustion test from the Brac Fantine resource. Chair, we've had evidence on that previously, and it is reflected in the reports, both of Fundudzi and National Treasury. So as at 10 March, there has not yet been a successful combustion test for coal from Fantine to be supplied to Majuba, correct?
I think I need to comment on something. There's a test that was done in August 2014 that
Correct.
the Fundutsi report refers to.
Yes.
And it does not state that it is accepted for Majuba, but there is some conditions to it. So I think the correction might be to say there has been tests, but it has not been suitable for Majuba yet. So there has been tests that was done, but at that moment in time, on the 10th of March, there wasn't a test that clearly stated that this coal is suitable for Majuba, that I can confirm.
Indeed, and we will go...
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. So normally, when a combustion test is conducted, would it be conducted in relation to a particular power station?
Chair, not necessarily. When the sourcing team source coal, they have a certain power station in mind.
Yes.
At this moment in time, when the sourcing team were looking for coal, there was a huge shortage of coal in the Eskom system. So at this moment in time, what one will typically do is to combust the coal, and then once the coal is combusted, look at where it is suitable for which power station. So one will typically find in those combustion reports that it will provide an indication under the conclusion section where it will state that it is suitable for the following stations, maybe also reflecting on that it is marginally suitable or provisionally suitable for certain power stations.
You said the one thing unusual about clause 10, about this condition precedent, was that it contemplates the conducting of a combustion test after the signing of the agreement, whereas the norm is that it is conducted, that is a combustion test, it is conducted before the signing of a contract.
That is correct, yes.
Yes, that was the one thing. But you also said, as I understood you, and you must tell me if I misunderstood you, you also said something to the effect that it was unusual that the condition precedent relating to the conducting of a combustion test was, or related to, or specific to Majuba. Or did I misunderstand you?
Gee, I think your understanding is correct. What I wanted to say is that normally we will do a combustion test. It will come back and it will say it's suitable for power stations X, Y, and Z. What is interesting here is that here the combustion test had to be done by a specific time, and it had to be suitable for Majuba power station. So the expectation, or my understanding from this, was that the fuel sourcing team was looking at this reserve or this source of supply destined to Majuba power station, and it had to be suitable for Majuba power station, correct?
But if the whole contract was in relation to Majuba, would it not be normal to say when the combustion test is conducted, they must do so to establish whether it's suitable, the coal would be suitable for that particular power station?
That is correct, Chair.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand why you seem to have a problem with the fact that it specifies this particular power station, the condition precedent, in the context of how or when it was done, because you say it's not normal that you should find this in a contract, because it would have been done before the combustion test. So I'm trying to find out what it is that you thought was unusual about the specification of the power station in the context of this one.
Chair, I think this condition precedent could just have read that a combustion test needed to be done by 1600 on the 31st from the supplier. And that would have meant that a combustion test will be done, the results will come back, and let's for a moment just say this coal is now suitable to go to Kendal Power Station, for argument's sake. So the report might reflect that this coal is only suitable for Kendal Power Station. And it seems to me that at this time, the fuel sourcing team had something in mind. I will just speculate around it, but I think that's the point that I wanted to make. So it seems that it wasn't the fact that just a combustion test had to be done for the mere fact of just doing a test, but the purpose was to do a combustion test to identify the suitability of this product for supply to Majuba Power Station. I think from previous testimonies, Chair, you have heard that certain power stations have different specifications of coal, and I think that is what I'm trying to emphasize here, is that it can't just go to any power station.
Yes, I'm trying to remember. Wasn't Fantine about Majuba? Fantine. Was the contract not specific to Majuba?
Yes, it was.
So if the contract was specific to Majuba, I fail to understand why you find something strange about them saying the combustion test must be a combustion test must be conducted to establish whether the coal is suitable for Majuba, because if those who conducted the combustion test found that the coal was suitable but not for Majuba but for another power station, that would be useless to the contract.
Chair, that is correct. However,
so it was important for them to say the result of the combustion test must be that the coal is suitable for Majuba.
That's
because
correct.
If the result of the combustion test is that coal is suitable for another power station and not Majuba, then the condition precedent, it won't help this particular contract. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you. So just to clarify, in the ordinary course, you'd only enter into the contract once the successful combustion test had been completed and the correct power station had been identified, correct?
That is correct, as well as that the power station that was identified has accepted that coal.
Indeed. Correct. In the ordinary course, all of that happens before the agreement is signed,
That's correct? That's correct.
In this case, we know the agreement was signed. It was going to supply coal to Majuba from Fantine, correct?
Correct.
But there had not yet been a successful combustion test for Majuba, correct?
Correct.
And so a condition precedent was inserted, and you've clarified for us, Mr. Opperman, that the responsibility within Eskom's divisions for confirming that that had taken place lay with fuel sourcing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I'd then like to take you to another clause of the contract, and that is where the quality specification is set out. That is at page 890. Before we get to the questions in relation to the table on coal quality specification, can you just assist us, Mr. Opperman? Where were the sources of coal that were going to be mined under this agreement with Taketa?
The Brakfontein Colliery is in close proximity to Delmas. It's maybe a better explanation is between Delmas and Leandra. It's the road that connects those two towns is the R35, and it was very close to another colliery that has been supplying coal to Eskom and also coal to Majuba Power Station for some time. Kuyasa Colliery, Kuyasa Delmas Colliery was the colliery.
Thank you. I'll ask you some questions about Kuyasa in due course, but you've referred only to the Brakfontein Colliery. Was there another source of coal that was covered by this agreement?
Yes, it was also the Brakfontein extension was also covered under the agreement.
And we've had evidence previously from Mr. Mushy that those two portions of land are separated by a road. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's the R35.
Right. So on the one side of the road, you've got the colliery, and on the other side of the road, you've got the extension. Is that correct?
That's correct.
As at March 2015, had the extension been mined yet?
No.
So the only mining that was happening in March 2015 was of the colliery
That's
on the
correct.
one side of the road.
At Fantine, correct, yes.
Thank you. And yet the contract was for a source of coal from both portions, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I'd like to now look at page 890, where the quality specifications are set out. You'll see under that table, which Mr. Mashigo has addressed in his evidence, there is italicized insertions, one of which is preceded by 2 asterisks. Could you read what appears after those 2 asterisks?
Full combustion test will be conducted on all proposed coal prior to delivery and acceptance by Eskom. The objective of the combustion test is to ascertain suitability of the coal for use by Eskom.
Now, Mr. Opperman, we engaged with Mr. Mashigo in his evidence about this provision because it is over and above the condition precedent that we saw at clause 10. He indicated that it would not be practically feasible to do a combustion test on all coal delivered under this contract, because that would be a combustion test on a daily basis. If that was impractical, can you offer any other better understanding of what may have been intended by that asterisk?
Well, maybe let's ask him first. Do you agree with that view by Mr. Mashigo?
Chair, maybe I just want to expand on his view. I think I do agree with it, but I think
Yes.
one needs to expand on it. I agree that it's impractical to do a combustion test on each consignment. That is impractical. A consignment is a defined term in the contract, and that's impractical. I think for me, my interpretation of this provision under this table, focus on the word proposed. That one reads in the first sentence. So I'm just going to read it again and put some emphasis on it. Full combustion test will be conducted on all proposed coal prior to delivery and acceptance by Eskom. The objective of the combustion test is to ascertain suitability of the coal for use by Eskom. So what my understanding is from this is to say that should there be any additional coal proposed, meaning the combustion test for the existing coal that is supplied is there. It has been done, it's there. Should there be any other proposals, then that coal needs to be combusted again. And that is my understanding of this provision, and that is the interpretation, and it's perfectly in line with the practice that we follow.
When you say on the interpretation that you put on this provision, do you have in mind a situation where the extension on the other side of the road started mining coal, and if it was proposed that coal from the extension be sold to Eskom, is that what you think they are talking about?
That is 100%, Chair.
Okay, all right. In which case, that would be practical, you say?
Exactly.
And in line with standard practice?
Correct.
Okay, but not if it was on the other interpretation?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. When did you take over management of this contract?
The management of the contract was officially handed to me on the 20th of April.
Had deliveries to Majuba preceded that date?
Yes.
Why then would you only have taken over management on the 20th of April?
Chair, I've started consultation with my senior at the moment, at that moment around the 30th of March already. I was involved every now and again in meetings with the fuel sourcing team in the capacity of looking after Majuba, with this source being destined to Majuba, in my liaison with Majuba in terms of accepting this coal. So I was involved with the team with this, but what will normally happen when a contract comes up for handover to fuel sourcing, a contract manager will be identified in our team, and that person will then take the lead and start managing that contract. So on the 30th of March, I started inquiring about who will be managing this contract, because I have been involved with it up until now, liaising with Majuba Power Station. But at that moment in time, I have already been managing 5 other contracts, so I did not know how it will be handled. On the 13th of April, I again made a follow-up, and my senior then reflected that they will look at the workload and then allocate it. On the 20th of April, I again made a follow-up via email, and that day he indicated that he has consulted with his senior, our general manager, and a decision was made that I will be the responsible lead on this contract. And that is basically the day when I got to know I will now be managing this contract going forward.
So who was managing it before that?
I would like to think that it was managed by the fuel sourcing team. I can't say who managed it. Yeah.
Can I go back to 890, where we're talking about your interpretation and Mr. Mashego's interpretation? The one view may be that in regard to your interpretation, to the extent that what you say this caters for is normal practice that would be followed all the time with new or proposed coal from a new mine. It may not have been necessary to write that down because that's normal, everybody knows it. But I guess maybe to the reason why they may have thought it necessary to put it in here is because the extension and the colliery being divided by just a road maybe might have, they didn't want anybody from Brackfontein to think, well, the fact that a combustion test had been conducted in regard to the colliery meant that there would be no need for a combustion test for the extension if it began to mine coal. So just to be on the safe side, they put it in on your interpretation.
That's correct, Chairman.
Okay.
When you took over management of the contract on the 20th of April, did you know that a financial due diligence on Taketa had not yet been done?
No, I did not know it.
Would that be something you would ordinarily be responsible for checking?
No, it's something that fuel sourcing must do.
Thank you. I'd now like to move ahead in time to June 2015. So as I have it, you've taken over contract management on the 20th of April, and now we progress to June 2015, and for that purpose, I'd like to turn your attention in U4 file 4 to page 816.
What's the page number again?
816, Chair.
Thank you.
So by this stage, we're a matter of months into the coal supply agreement that was concluded with Taketa. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Please will you tell us what is reflected in the first paragraph of this letter? Well, let's begin with the letter. Who sends the letter?
It's Mr. Ravinda Nath, the Chief Executive of Taketa Exploration and Resources.
Sorry, my question was who sent the letter? That seems to be the person it is addressed to.
Oh, pardon me. It's sent from Mr. Bester, and the inquiries is referred to Ms. Nteta, Ayanda Nteta.
Thank you. So it's an Eskom letter going to whom?
Taketa.
Thank you. And what does the first paragraph of the letter indicate its subject matter is?
Coal supply offer Taketa Brackfontein Colliery extension.
Right. And if you could just read those first 2 sentences of the letter for us.
We refer to the above and wish to thank you for your offer to supply an additional 100,000 tonnes per month of coal to Eskom from your Brakfontein Colliery extension with effect from October 2015.
And carry on.
This would potentially increase your supply to Eskom to a total of 200,000 tonnes per month. Following our meeting on the 19th of June 2015, Eskom wishes to record some of the material terms the parties agreed on.
Okay, let's just stop there. In June 2015, were you aware that Eskom was engaging in discussions with Taketa to take another 100,000 tonnes of coal from the Brakfontein Colliery extension?
Chair, I can't say that I was aware of, was not aware, but at that moment in time it was not something that I know about.
Was the Brakfontein Colliery extension being mined in June?
I'm sorry, Mr. Opperman. You say you can't say whether you were aware or not aware, but you can't say that it was something you knew about. What exactly do you want to tell us?
It might have been that somewhere someone was talking about this offer of the Gaeta or engagement about it. But at that moment in time, me managing the contract, having any engagement with the supplier at that moment in time, starting to prepare the operations for doubling the volumes and things, that was definitely not happening.
So you were not involved in that way?
No.
Yes, okay.
Was the Brakfontein Colliery extension being mined in June 2015?
According to me, no.
So what do you make of a letter that's proposing to take 100,000 tonnes more from an extension that's not yet being mined?
I don't know how they will do it. I mean, if the box cut is not open and the coal is not out there, which is something that doesn't happen in a month, that's a lengthy process. I don't know how they were going to do it. I think the offer is from October. We're now sitting at end June, so that gives you July, August, September, 3 months. That will be tough to get it right.
As a matter of fact, was the Brakfontein Colliery extension mined even by October 2015?
No, not according to my records.
And if it hadn't been mined, I expect it certainly hadn't yet been tested.
For sure.
If you had been engaged in June 2015, what views would you have had about the coal that might come from the extension?
Well, the first thing is I would have wanted to go to the mine and go and see a pit that's open, a box cut that was made, a section of open cast mine that's in production, so that we can take a combustion sample and combust it, get some results from that, look at the suitability of that coal. Coal needs to be processed, so somewhere there should have been a processing plant, all those things. So that would be my first point of view. I would like to ascertain, is this practically achievable?
You mentioned Koukos mine previously. What is its proximity to the Brakfontein extension?
Other than a servitude, an Eskom servitude for a high line that goes past Brakfontein extension, these two mining reserves shares the same boundary.
And what is your experience of the coal that comes from Koukos, well, came from Koukos at that time?
At that time, the coal that came from there had high sulfur content.
Would that have been any reason to be concerned about the coal that might come from the extension?
Yes, definitely.
Can you also help us? At that time, you said Koukos was a supplier to Majuba, as was Brakfontein. We will come to this in the evidence of Mr. Bester, and so I'm just moving forward in anticipation of it. But the price that was agreed, and it's reflected in the CSA for the Brakfontein coal supply agreement, was a price of R13.50 per gigajoule. Can you tell us what Koukos was supplying Majuba at that stage? Chair,
I was not responsible for Koukos at that moment in time, but the price from Kuyasa would have been in the region of about 10 rand 50 a gigajoule.
Thank you. And then let's talk about how Kuyasa used to get its coal to Majuba as compared with how Fantine got its coal to Majuba. We understand from the evidence of Mr. Mashiko that this can happen either by rail or by road. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So please explain to us, how was Kuyasa supplying its coal to Majuba?
Kuyasa Delmas has their own railway siding inside the mine boundary. So the trains will pass via the Haverklip siding, go through the Haverklip siding into the mine itself, and the mine will load the trains, and the trains will then leave from Kuyasa Delmas directly to Majuba. Kuyasa Delmas also had the capability to do road transportation, but it was done only at contingencies or very low volumes, or when we had to take coal to a different destination. So at some stage, Kuyasa Delmas was supplying coal to Camden Power Station, and we would then typically take that coal from Kuyasa via road.
And can you please compare that to Fantine? How was Fantine getting its coal to Majuba?
Fantine had two modes of deliveries, the one being via road, using a third-party contractor, so they were not responsible for the transportation. It was done through a company managed by Eskom, or alternatively via rail, via Haverklip siding. This siding was not owned and operated by Taketa. The siding is about 8 kilometers away from the colliery, so there will be a short leg that we will do via road trucks to the siding at Haverklip. At Haverklip, there is a contractor that's contracted to then load the Majuba trains, and the trains will then depart from there to Majuba.
Which is the more costly form of transport, rail or road?
Road.
And at this stage, if you compare Kuyasa and Fantine's transport costs, which would have been higher?
Fantine would have been higher because they were on a road and Kuyasa was on rail.
Thank you. So to clarify, Kuyasa was supplying coal that was cheaper at a rand per gigajoule rate and cheaper as to transportation.
Correct.
Thank you. I'd then like to move to July and August of 2015. As contract manager at that stage, Mr. Opperman, can you tell us...
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. Are you on his statement now, or where are you?
I'm not on his statement, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
The reason for that is that these aspects of the Fantine evidence
Yes.
are in fact not recorded in his statement.
Yes.
They were the product of engagements with Mr. Opperman
Yes.
after he produced the statement,
Okay.
for the purpose of which documents have been included in the bundle.
Okay, all
So I'm having to work off the statement at this point.
Okay.
And that is why I'm trying to move very carefully chronologically through it.
Yes. Okay, what page are you on now?
So we are now going to go to 824.
Thank you. I maybe later when he is done, we might just have to talk about how we, whether we leave things as they are in regard to the fact that part of his evidence is in his statement and part of it isn't there, or whether it might be convenient to have some supplementary statement that covers
Indeed.
what could have been done earlier.
Indeed,
We can just
Chair.
think about that. Yeah, okay.
We will make a note of that, certainly. Mr. Opperman and Chair, I directed you to 824, but I'd actually like to proceed at 819. Mr. Opperman, what appears at page 819 of U4?
This is a suspension of coal supply notice from Eskom to Taketa.
Were you aware of this at the time?
No, I wasn't.
Were you aware, let's read the first paragraph of that letter, if you will.
Eskom notes a significant increase in the number of out-of-specification coal stockpiles from July to August 2015. During August 2015, 50% of the stockpiles have been out of specification, resulting in rejection. Further, Eskom notes the inconsistency in the laboratory results as the outcome of coal samples provided by the mine.
Is that something you were aware of at the time?
Yes.
So would it be correct to say that in July and August of 2015, there were issues arising in relation to the quality of coal coming from Fantine?
Yes.
And then if you go to page 824, what is that?
This is again a notice from Eskom to Taketa, upliftment of the suspension of the coal supply. So it's uplifting the suspension on the previous letter.
Were you engaged about this letter at all?
No, not at all.
You've indicated you were aware of coal quality issues in July and August. In your view, was it appropriate to suspend the contract in the light of those issues?
No, not necessarily. I think there is other contractual means to deal with it.
And what would those means have been?
Firstly, if a stockpile, the coal is pre-certified, Chair, and I think that process has been explained by Mr. Mushy. So if a stockpile fails the results at the nominated laboratory, the supplier or Eskom has the option to declare a dispute. Once that dispute is declared, the results that the reference sample will go to a reference laboratory. Once that result becomes available, that becomes final and binding. If the supplier then still feels aggrieved by that, then contractually pretty much there's nothing that can be done. The bottom line is that that stockpile has failed qualities. It is termed reject coal according to the contract, and the supplier then need to reprocess that coal or seek a different market or whatever. He can do with that coal whatever he wants to. There is a process in the coal supply agreement that clearly guides it in terms of the reprocessing of that coal, that you're not allowed to just resample it, but it must be reprocessed.
But Mr. Opperman, 50% of stockpiles being out of specification in a month, is that customary?
No, that is a lot. But being mining, one of my learned colleagues always referred to coal mining as that it's not a cheese factory. The inconsistency of this product that we work with, as well as our inability to see what is happening there underground, does sometimes take you to an area where you have these challenges. So it might be that in the advancement of the mine, as you are progressing in this mining reserve, that you get into a portion that is prone to a quality parameter that does not fall in within specifications. And then one will do additional sampling and drilling. That's a mining expert or a geologist will know how to deal with it. So you will increase your sampling and things like that. And I would like to say that is fairly common, that you will hit these pockets, and especially when we started experiencing these challenges, many of them were on sulfur. So I was not extremely surprised that there were so many stockpiles that all of a sudden has failed on sulfur, because the mining reserve from Kuyasa just next to it had similar issues.
Mr. Opperman, Eskom at the time didn't share your view because they deemed it appropriate to suspend the agreement. That's what we saw at page 819. If you go to page 824, however, you've indicated that is a letter lifting the suspension. What is the date of the letter at 824?
The 5th of September.
And the year?
2015.
And what was the date of the preceding suspension?
31 August 2015.
So a period of 7 days, is that correct?
Yes.
Why is the letter at 819 from Mr. Machela Koko to Taketa, written on the basis, and it's written on 31 August 2015. Why is it written on the basis that Taketa was supplying coal from both the colliery and the extension? Because my understanding of your evidence earlier was that even as at October, there was no mining taking place at the extension.
Chair, I think this is a standard description of this mine and the contract. If one go and look at the title of this contract, it will read it's an agreement between Eskom and Brac extension. So I think it's just a reference to the supply agreement that's relevant.
And not to the extension on the other side of the road that we were told about.
Correct. It does not relate to the physical mining of an area. It just refers to the title of the agreement.
Which I guess then, in the light of your interpretation of that provision that we talked about, may make it even quite understandable why that clause would have been put in on your interpretation. Because the description itself might give rise to the interpretation that the extension is already covered.
100%, Chair.
Yes, okay.
If we just focus at 819 for the moment, you've indicated you may not have taken the step, if you'd been consulted about this, to suspend the coal supply agreement. But the letter confirms a suspension, is that correct?
That is correct.
And the reason for it is given in the second paragraph. If you could read that out, please.
This is with great concern to Eskom that it is now that it now calls into question the exact nature and quality. That it questioned the exact nature and quality of the coal at Brakfontein Colliery and Brakfontein Colliery extension supplies to Eskom in terms of the coal supply agreement.
So there was concern on the part of Eskom about the quality of coal coming from Brakfontein. Is that fair?
Fair, yes.
And then 7 days later, at page 824, that suspension is lifted. Is that correct?
Correct.
What, in your view, would need to have happened in those 7 days to move it from a situation of great concern to one which would have satisfied Eskom to continue with the contract?
Chair, over that period, there was multiple retesting of samples that was done at different laboratories, as well as the engagement from the research and development combustion specialists, the guys that's doing the combustion test that we spoke about earlier, in order to understand possible reasons for what has happened here.
And what would those tests have to have shown to re-engage the contract?
Well, firstly, one would like to see that the retest of the sample reflects the same results as the original laboratory results, because that will confirm that there is an issue in the ground. And if that then confirms that there is an issue in the ground, then one can deal with the geology at that mining reserve.
Well, let's stop there, because the evidence that has been presented already to the Commission through the statement of Dr. van der Riet is that, far from confirming the non-conformances, when the results of the Sibonisiwe lab were then, when the reserve sample from the Sibonisiwe lab that had failed 15 out of 30 samples was sent to SABS for reanalysis, SABS failed 29 out of the 30. Would that have been a reason to re-engage the contract?
Well, one could re-engage the contract. It does not mean that the supply will commence again, but at least now one will know what the issue is, and one will then have to deal with it.
Is it fair to say there'd be concern if the second laboratory found more non-conformances than the first laboratory?
Yes, I mean, that actually shows that the issue at hand is even worse than what one expected initially.
The evidence that has already been presented to the Commission has shown that the only stockpile that was tested between these two dates, well, let me be more specific, between the 29th of August and the 7th of September, which are 2 dates on either side of the sending of these letters, was a stockpile that was later found not possibly to have come from Brac Colliery. Are you aware of that?
I later became aware of it, yes.
If the only sample that was taken in this period was concluded by the technical experts at Eskom not to have come from Brac mine, would you be concerned about any reliance being placed on that test for the purposes of re-engaging the contract?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Opperman, if you'll turn over the page to page 824 AA.1. Chair, you'll forgive the very unfortunate pagination at this point. It's only indicative of the rate at which these documents were becoming available and the need to insert them. So we do apologize for the AA.1.
No, that's fine. I'm just trying to, I see the single A, I'm trying to find the double A.
Chair, if you go to 824 alone,
Yes.
and then just turn over the next page.
Yes.
After 824, that should be AA.
Oh, yes, okay, thank you.
Mr. Opperman, at 824 AA.1 is an email, is that correct? Or is it a train of emails?
That's correct.
Are these emails that you provided to the Commission?
Yes, I have.
What is the date? If you go to 824 AA.2 and you start at the bottom of that page, as I have it, that's the first of the emails in this train. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What is the date of the email?
7 September 2015.
Okay, can you please take the chair through what happened before this email was received, what happened after it was received, and follow that through as the email progresses up the train?
So, Chair, the first email at the bottom is the email from SABS Laboratory where they're making available the results from a certain stockpile. At this moment in time, this email will have an attachment with all the stockpiles analyzed for the month to date. So that is the first email that is referenced there. The second email at the top of that page.
I'm sorry, the first email you are referring to, is it the one that purports to come from you?
No, it's on the next page at the bottom. It's from...
Are you at 824 AA.2?
That's correct, Chair.
Oh, okay. I thought she had directed you to 824 AA.1, so I was looking at that page. You moved to 824 AA.2. That is, you were talking about the email at the bottom that comes from Zenzi Banda, is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay. Just repeat what is that email about?
So, Chair, that is an email from SABS Laboratory reporting on the results of a stockpile that was analyzed. Then the email just above that is about half an hour later on the same date, also on the 7th of September, from Mr. Mudaliar from Taketa, addressed to myself. And the email reads, "Hi, please find attached results as required by you. Looking forward to hear from you."
Yes.
So at this moment in time, I was engaged by Mr. Roo, which was also copied on that email from Mr. Mudaliar, to dispatch a stockpile, and the stockpile is the stockpile number that's referenced on that page 824AA.1 as BKF SPB 0609. So it's right there at the bottom of the page on the right-hand corner.
Yes.
I was asked by Mr. Roux that if they can dispatch the stockpile to Majuba Power Station. What made it out of the ordinary is the fact that one of the quality parameters on this stockpile did not meet the contractual specifications. So according to the contract, this coal will now be termed reject coal. It is not contract coal, and hence it cannot be dispatched. As contract manager, I don't have the authority to make a decision to dispatch this coal. I can't do it. And I immediately told him, you cannot dispatch this coal. I cannot support it. You need to either declare a dispute or you need to reprocess the coal. You've got one of those two options. Mr. Roux was not pleased with my response, and we disconnected the phone call. And then soon thereafter, I received a phone call from Mr. Koukos, asking me that I must please engage the Majuba Power Station to accept this product. I then engaged my senior at the time, Mr. Ngube, and I asked him, what must I do? This is now instruction that I must perform outside the mandate of the contract, and he encouraged me to engage the power station. I then did engage the power station, and that is the email at the bottom of page 824 is what I drafted as a follow-up. And it reads, following our telephonic discussion, this email seeks your written support to dispatch stockpile, and I did reference it, from Brockfontein to Majuba Power Station. We'll appreciate your earliest response. And then Majuba Power Station then respond at the email right at the top of that page at 5:24, agreeing that the stockpile can be dispatched. What's of importance is that the quality parameter, or what's of note, maybe not of importance, of note, is the quality parameter that was out of specification on the stockpile was on the size fraction. I think we spent a lot of time on the size fraction on Friday, but this time it was on the top size, not on the fine size. So this contract has a limit that coal grade bigger than 50 millimeter, 50, may not exceed 5%. So in this analysis, not more than 5%, may be bigger than 50 millimeter. And for this specific stockpile, the stockpile was 5.4%. So it was only 0.4% out of specification, but it was out of specification. So Majuba Power Station agreed to accept this, let's term it for now, coarser coal, and the stockpile was dispatched.
Thank you. Can we just go back to the phone call you received from Mr. Koukos? Was it usual for him to call you about pre-certified coal that had not met quality specifications under a coal supply agreement?
No, it was not usual.
Had he ever done so before?
No, not at this time.
And in relation to any other contract?
No, not.
Did
I'm sorry, it's important to understand exactly what he said to you, okay? Was what he said to you that you must talk to the power station to persuade them to accept coal that should not actually be accepted? Was that the effect of what he said? And it's important to say exactly what you understood him to be saying to you.
Chair, that was exactly the effect. The exact words I can't recall, but yes. The intent was for me to engage the power station and get the power station approval to accept this coal.
Ordinarily, if you took the view that this coal did not meet the requirements, the specification, that would be the end of that, unless there was either a dispute declared and then what would happen would depend on the outcome of the dispute, or there was, I don't know whether you said a reprocessing or renewal or reprocessing of the code. Is that what would normally be the position?
Yes, Chair, that's the position.
So what he was saying to you was something unusual to be done?
Yes.
Or was it usual?
No, it was unusual.
Yeah. And I assume that for you to comply with his instruction, if that was an instruction, in regard to talking to the power station, you would have had to come across to the power station as somebody who thought that this coal should be accepted, when in fact your own view was that it should not be accepted. Is that right? Or am I wrong?
Chair, I can only work within the boundaries of the contract.
Yes.
My view, if it should be accepted or not, I think it's immaterial. The boundary of the contract does not allow me to approve dispatch of this product. So if this happens to me, my answer to any supplier is, you can't dispatch this coal, you need to dispute it or reprocess it.
Yes, but isn't the position that you look at whatever is before you to see whether the specifications are met or are complied with? Is that right?
That's correct.
And if your conclusion is that the specifications are not complied with, you reject the code?
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, here you had concluded that this call should be rejected.
That's correct.
But here was Mr. Koko now giving you a call and in effect saying you must talk to the power station with a view to something being done which you believed was contrary to the contract. Is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
So do you accept that what he wanted you to do was something that, as far as you were concerned, was not in accordance with the contract?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Opperman, if we can then go over to the next document, which is at 824A.1.
Before you go there, let's just maybe complete this. You told me that after Mr. Koko had spoken to you, you spoke to your senior, and I think you said your senior was a Mr. Ngube, is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
And as I understood your evidence, you wanted to tell, and you did tell Mr. Ngube what I think was your predicament arising out of this call from Mr. Koko, is that right?
That's correct, Chair. I made it clear that this coal is out of specification and that we cannot move it. And I've now received this request to engage the power station to make deliveries. And I mean, I can't do it. And
Yes.
he then said to me that I need to honor the request and engage the power station.
Yeah, well, that's precisely what I wanted us to canvass, to hear more about the exchange between yourself and your senior. So from what you have told me, you have just told me, your senior was left in no doubt that your view was that this was wrong.
Correct.
In other words, to do what Mr. Koko was asking you to do.
Correct.
And in regard to your concerns that this was wrong, what view did your senior take? Did he agree with you that it was wrong, but nevertheless it should be done because it was coming from Mr. Koko, somebody senior? Or what was his view? Was his view that he didn't agree with you that this was wrong?
Chair, I think Mr. Ngube agreed with me that within the boundaries of the contract, our function was that we could not dispatch this coal. It wasn't that Mr. Nube told me, but you don't know what you're talking about, why are you being difficult, or something like that. There was not that type of discussion. There was a discussion to say, well, here's an issue, you had an instruction to do this, better do it. You know, it pretty much come down to that.
When you were speaking to Mr. Koko, I assume that you had told him that you thought that the coal was should be rejected, or was a reject coal, and that it should not be accepted, or did you not tell him that?
Yeah, I can't recall that I told him that, but
Yes.
I can recall from the discussion that when he phoned me, he realized that this coal cannot move. So
Yes.
I could sense that he had an engagement from somebody.
Yes.
I can only speculate who that was.
Yes.
But he had an engagement. He understood my position was that I did not approve the coal to leave the mine, and I was now asked to engage the power station to get permission to move this coal.
So you say that when he spoke to you, your understanding was that he knew that your
Sure.
position was that this coal was did not comply with the specifications and should be rejected.
Yes.
But you did not, the two of you did not specifically speak about that.
No, we did not specifically talk about it.
Yes.
Chair, discussions with Mr. Koko normally was very short.
Is there any particular reason why you didn't say to him, but Mr. Koko, why should I speak to the power station about this coal, because this coal should be rejected in terms of the contract?
Chair, I did not ask Mr. Koko that, no.
Yeah, I want to understand why, because you were quite clear in your mind on the evidence you have told me. You were quite clear that this coal should be rejected, and here was somebody from higher up effectively saying go against what you believe to be right.
Chair, my expectation with engaging my senior was to
Yes.
fulfill that function.
Yes.
Mr. Koko, at that moment in time, were a couple of levels in management above me.
Yes, so
3-4 levels above me.
yes, so you
so-
preferred to talk to your senior so that maybe if you persuaded your senior that this was wrong, then he could escalate the whole concern.
That's exactly it. My expectation was engaging my senior to say, this is our situation. My senior knew the contract content.
Yes,
He knew,
yes.
he was 100% aware of what is the implication of us doing this. It means that at the end of the month, we will receive a payment back where both of us will have to sign off coal that was out of specification. And somewhere, somehow, there would have had to be some supporting documentation that authorized us to make this payment. So
Yes.
he was very much aware of what the impact of this is. So my expectation is then that my senior will engage his senior, who will engage his senior, who will engage Mr. Koko on this. And that will typically would have been my expectation.
So part of the understanding between yourself and your senior was that if steps were taken to get the power station to accept this coal in accordance with Mr. Koko's instruction or suggestion, there may be trouble later on when certain documents have to be signed.
For sure.
That was part of your concern.
For sure.
But once you understood that your senior was approving also that the power station be engaged, you thought, well, he will know how to deal with that situation when it comes. Is that what you are saying?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes.
We're coming out of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture in Parktown, where Mr. Gert Opperman, an executive senior manager from Eskom, is currently testifying about coal supply agreements, the quality of coal that was provided, the transportation of this coal, and some of these contracts being
allow themselves to be party to wrong things, that they would preferably not have allow themselves to be party to. So I go back to my question to say, did you go along when you knew that this was wrong? And if you are able to speak for Mr. Ngube, you can also say, in case, based on your discussions, it's clear why both of you decided to go along with something that you both were quite clear was wrong.
Chair, I don't know how to answer that question. I think my viewpoint from the onset when I was confronted was not to go along with it. And that's why I was very firm when I told Mr. Roux, which at that time was the CEO of the Gaeta, which is a senior person that I will deal with a lot of respect, and told him, sir, respectfully, we cannot move the skull. And for me, that was the end of it. I never, at that moment in time when we had that discussion, had envisaged that there will be some call from somewhere to deal with it different. In my line of work, we deal with it that way, and then that is the end of it. You declare a dispute, it comes back, it's in spec, you ship it, it's out of spec, you reprocess it. That's how we deal with it. So when I received this call, firstly, I was extremely surprised that Mr. Koukos phoned me, and then I get this instruction to do it. And my expectation was really, when I engaged Mr. Ngube, to say, I don't support this, I don't agree with this. What do I need to do? And I would have loved Mr. Ngube saying to me, don't do it, and him then taking the brunt for it, because he would have had to go to Mr. Koukos and tell him, listen, we are not going to do it. That is my expectation. But that was not the advice that I got. I think talking about Mr. Koukos' management style and the way that he will threaten or talk to people, all of those things at that moment in time, it's part of your life. When you're in the corridor, you hear how people is treated, people goes on suspension, other people gets dismissed, things like that. So at that moment in time, you trying to be reasonable and do the right thing, but you can only operate within the boundary of the contract, and that is where my extent of responsibility ended, or authority ended for that matter, and that's why I engaged my senior. These type of decisions, I won't say I make on a daily basis, but I make them very regular, and it is not an issue to make that type of decisions. Shipping a stockpile is a couple of $1 million, so you, at the drop of a coin, you make a decision, sorry, you go and reprocess this coal, or it's good to go. So on this day, it worked out different. It is not an easy decision. It is definitely not an easy decision. It's easy to say no, that is easy. The next step to come, that came around from it, to say engage the power station, and then everything that happened there, it is not comfortable. I, for one, work very hard at building up a relationship with my client at the power station, and it's not good to engage your client on something that you really know it's wrong, and you need to persuade them to say, but take it. And I think earlier on you tried to get me to talk a bit about it, and I can talk a lot about why potentially this was not a bad idea to take this coal. It is irrelevant. The governance of this coal supply agreement did not allow me the opportunity to apply my mind and think what is good for the organization, or think what's good for the mine, or either way.
Well, I just mentioned this, that why it's important for me to understand what your thinking may have been when you were faced with this situation is this, that certain wrong things, not just maybe at Eskom, maybe elsewhere, and maybe in the country as well, in terms of what this commission is looking at. Certain wrong things may not have happened if people who knew that these things were wrong stood their ground or stood up to leaders, to people who were senior to them, and say, but this is wrong. And the question that at some stage I may have to deal with is, for the future, what are the measures that should be put in place in a place such as Eskom or any parastatal to make sure that if at some stage in the future anybody tried to get wrong things to be done and approved and implemented, good people at Eskom will be able to say no. In other words, is there an environment that made it difficult for good people to stand for what is right? And if there was an environment that made it difficult for people who didn't want to be party to wrong things, if there was an environment that made it difficult for them to take a stand, what is it that can be put in place to make sure that next time, if something similar happens, there will be an environment that will enable them to say no and not allow themselves to be party to wrong things, and in that way, hopefully save Eskom, save parastatals, save the country a lot of money. You understand?
I do. Thanks,
Okay,
Chair.
thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I see we're close to the tea time. I have just one or two follow-up points on this, if I may.
Yes.
When you engaged the power station, Mr. Opperman, did you motivate for the acceptance, or did you indicate your discomfort about it?
I did indicate my discomfort about it. I definitely did not motivate it. I put it on the table and I was engaging with the coal manager, and I told him, this is the stockpile, this is the volume, all the other quality parameters is fine, this one quality parameter is out of specification, this is the risk of this quality parameter being out of specification, so that he could go back and engage his seniors and make an informed decision. There was not a lot of engagement around it. The coal manager immediately understood what I told him. He was very knowledgeable, and he had the engagement on his side.
Thank you. You also spoke about something around the environment at Eskom at the time and what you hear in the corridors. You mentioned people being suspended. At that date, the 7th of September 2015, were you aware that Dr. van der Riet and his team had been suspended 6 days earlier?
I can't say that I was, yes, I was aware. People talk. Mr. van der Riet sat in very close proximity to me. So his colleagues and things, you notice, people is not at the office and things like that, and people talk. We did not know what it was about or anything like that. So yes, it definitely was there.
Did you know, however, that he and his team were looking precisely at quality issues arising from the coal from Fantine?
No, that I did not know.
Thank you.
Let's go back to your discussion or engagement with the power station, pursuant to your discussion with Mr. Ngube and Mr. Koukos' call to you. You have said that you made your position clear, what the position was about this coal. And you have said that you did not motivate for it. But did you say something along the lines that Mr. Koukos called me or to say you must accept it, or that I must engage you, or that Mr. Koukos wants it to be accepted by you, or
Yes, Chair.
Or anything to that effect?
Yes, Chair. I did mention it that I received an instruction from Mr. Koukos to engage them.
Yes.
I did not indicate to accept it.
Yes.
I did indicate to the coal manager that I got an instruction to engage them, and
Yeah.
that he please might do an assessment, make an assessment and come back to me.
Okay. So just so that we know. One, you did not motivate for its acceptance by the power station. Two, you did say that you got an instruction from Mr. Koukos, and you did say what the instruction was.
Correct.
And three, you did make it clear what your view was of the coal.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chair, I'm moving on to another topic, so it may be an appropriate time to take the tea adjournment.
Yes, we'll take the tea adjournment and we'll resume at 11:30. We adjourn. Yes, you may proceed, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Thank you, Chair. Before the tea adjournment, Mr. Opperman, we were dealing with what had happened on the 7th of September and the interactions between you, Mr. Koukos, and Majuba Power Station about that particular stockpile that had not passed its pre-certification. What I'd next like to take you to is the next document in U4, which is at page 824, capital A.1. Can you please tell us what that document is?
Chair, this is a document from
I'm sorry. I missed the page. What page?
Chair, it's 824A.1, and it appears just after that set of emails that we were dealing with Mr. Opperman.
With a single A.
With a single A and a point 1, it's a letter of the 7th of October 2015.
Okay, I found it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What is this letter, Mr. Opperman?
Chair, this is a letter from Mr. Ngube from Eskom addressed to Mr. Jacques Roux at the Gaeta Exploration, requesting an independent audit on the coal pre-certification process at Brac Colliery.
Why was this letter sent to Mr. Roux?
Chair, this letter followed our concerns about the event that happened on the day. But this was also a requirement from the audit report that was presented by RT&D following all the stockpiles that has failed. So in that window of suspension, there was a report issued by RT&D, and one of those actions read that the contracted laboratories had to be audited and the sample procedures had to be assessed. So it was in line with that action.
And let's just go through what Mr. Ngube was requesting be done in the course of the audit of the Fantine Colliery. Can you take us through what the audit would comprise?
Yes, Chair, I can read the letter. Eskom is reviewing its pre-certification process and has appointed an independent service provider to assist with conducting an audit. The audit will comprise of 3 things. The first one, auditing the entire coal processing value chain from the point where run-of-mine coal is processed through to the creation of stockpiles. Number 2, a collection and analysis of representative sample. And then the last one, a video recording of the entire process. And then we close off by saying, please indicate when the auditing team may be accommodated as well as any safety requirements.
Was your view at the time that this audit was necessary?
Definitely, yes.
And what happened after this letter was sent on the 7th of October 2015?
There has been a number of efforts to then get this audit done, with engagements between myself and the operations team on site, as well as the technical services team that was facilitating this. And then what soon follows is a lot of changes at Brakfontein with relevance to laboratory services being terminated and things like that.
Was the audit proceeded with?
No, it was not, Chair.
Why not?
On the 19th of October, I received an instruction from Mr. Ngube to send out an email to Mr. Roux cancelling this audit.
Okay, let's go back a bit. Did Mr. Ngube support the need for the audit?
Yes.
He is the author of the letter of the 7th of October, is that correct?
Correct.
So why did he say to you it must be cancelled?
I think he was instructed to cancel it.
Well, did he say that he was instructed to cancel it?
I cannot recall that.
Did you ask him, knowing what his view was, namely that he wanted this audit done, when he asked you to cancel it, did you ask him why?
Chair, I do recall a conversation between ourselves. I recall it was somewhat late that evening or afternoon of the 19th when I had to send the email on the cancellation of it, and it was made clear that he received an instruction to do it. I can't recall explicitly that he told me that the instruction came from Mr. Koukos or from any specific individual. But he was clear that there was an instruction that we need to stop it. In fact, that evening when I sent out the email, I sent out an email indicating that the audit is postponed, and I then was soon after that email phoned to ask to please retract that email and make it clear that the audit is cancelled, it is not postponed.
And who phoned you to say you must do that?
Mr. Ngobe.
Mr.?
Ngobe.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Opperman, that is a fundamental shift in the position that was being taken within your division. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Let me just go back to the earlier question. You sent an email saying the audit was postponed. Did your email say that because that's what you understood you had been asked or instructed by Mr. Ngobe to do, namely that the audit was postponed? Or did you understand quite well that he had said to you it was to be cancelled and you should say it's being cancelled, but you, for some reason, preferred to say postponed?
Chair, between the 7th and the 19th, when the email was sent, there was consultation with the mine to set this up. And if I recall correctly, the site visit with the auditing team was imminent. It was the following day, maybe within 2 days. I do recall Mr. Ngobe telling me that it is cancelled, and he was very clear on it. In maybe English not being my first language, but also with the hope and the expectation that we can still do something to get this audit done, because it was important for us as the coal operations team to get it done. I wrote the email to Mr. Roux indicating that it is postponed, with the view that we might have an engagement on the following day and a discussion with whoever made this decision to cancel it, and try to persuade them and get it turned around, if I can say it like that.
Well, you have given 2 reasons why you said it was postponed. The latter reason, namely, you hoped that there might be engagement that would produce the result that it could still be done later and not cancelled. That reason I understand better. I've listened to you give your evidence in English. I think your English is very good. So I'm surprised that when you say, well, maybe your English not being good, cancel something and postpone something is something that you would clearly have understood, isn't it?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
By that stage of the 19th, had everything been readied for the audit to take place?
Chair, I was not personally facilitating the audit. It was done through our technical team, but my view was, yes, that it was ready. The audit was definitely not cancelled because of certain parties not being ready.
And are there costs associated with conducting an audit of this nature?
Yeah, there would be cost involved, especially the fact that it was an independent party, but our technical services department have contracts with service providers like that, so it is something that they would have deal with.
And the arrangement of video recording, is that an unusual feature of an audit?
Yes, yeah, this would have been the first time that we will do something like that. I have not been party to an audit like this where video footage were taken, yes.
But then why include it?
Well, that was part of the auditing team, the advice from the technical services. I would not know if it was maybe advice from the late Mr. van der Riet, maybe somewhere with his experience and his knowledge that he felt that it was important, because there was a couple of things that they wanted to achieve with analysis and retesting and things like that. I don't know if that was maybe of relevance. And then the intention of any audit is to learn from it and improve your processes. So I think it is valuable to have something afterwards to have a look at and say, well, guys, here and there we can improve on some things.
Mr. Opperman, this is a month after the previous instruction to act outside the terms of the contract that were inconsistent with its good management. Do you accept that?
Yes.
What did you do about it, if anything?
During this time, there was a lot of engagements with my senior, Mr. Ngube, as well as our acting GM at that moment, Mr. Mazibuku. One need to realize that in our organization, we sit very close to one another and we talk a lot. So I think when it gets to the point where one reduces something to writing, it must express the desperateness of one's effort to just get something out of it. And so by the time that you go and sit and you go and write an internal note to your senior or to your general manager, one needs to appreciate that this wasn't you just waking up one morning and thinking, hey, today I'm going to write a letter to my boss. By this time, you are actually so frustrated, you don't know where to go, what to do, and you just feel that you need to just somehow express this in some other way. And that's what we started doing. So there was a lot of engagements at this moment in time, both with the technical team and within our coal operations team. And one also need to appreciate that at this moment in time, Majuba still needed that coal. At this moment in time, Majuba had a shortfall of over 3 million tons for that financial year. So ultimately our function is to get coal to the power station, but we need to make sure that what gets there, we know is of the right quality and that we get value for money. So it was really frustrating circumstances.
But then why stand for it? Why not raise it with Mr. Ngube that this would materially disadvantage Eskom in the further performance of this contract?
Advocate Hofmeyer and Chair, with respect, Mr. Ngube knew this. Mr. Ngube is a learned person. He understands what the content is, and we all shared it. It was just such difficult circumstances, you know, being under this management of this executive team and what was happening at that moment in time. It was difficult.
So, are you suggesting that there was nothing you needed to tell Mr. Ngube about this being wrong, because you both knew it was wrong?
Jay, we had a lot of discussion around it. We definitely spoke about it, and we both knew that this was the right thing to do. At that moment in time, if I just look at the way that things were done around the office, most probably Mr. Ngube has, over that period of time, spent some time in Mr. Koukos' office, and he was called to the 3rd floor to ask and explain what's going on here, why do you want to do this, and things like that. But this is now me just talking on Mr. Ngube's behalf. But that was typically what was at the order of the day. This would have happened.
You mentioned an internal memorandum that you prepared. If you go over to page 824 A.2. Is that the memorandum you're referring to?
Yes.
And why did you write this memorandum?
Chair, this memorandum was written in a desperate measure just to put context to the preceding aspects to this audit being cancelled. And although it did not deal with the audit itself, the subject of the memo does read that this is a narrative information relating to the cancellation of the pre-certification audit, and it was dated 22nd of October. But in this document, my aim is to set out what has been happening at this colliery from inception of this contract when I had to start managing it. Where's the frustrations? What is the things that on a daily basis, on an operational level, the operational team is challenged with, and then also efforts that we've made it in trying to get coal moving from this mine.
Mr. Opperman, you've actually anticipated one of my concerns about this internal memo, because you're right that the subject refers to narrative information relating to the cancellation of pre-certification audit, but the text doesn't actually refer to that at all, does it?
No.
But why would it not? This is why you were writing. You were concerned, as I have your evidence, that the pre-certification audit had been cancelled. Why doesn't that find its way into the text?
I can't answer that for now. I don't know why it was excluded specifically from the text. I don't know.
If you go over to page 824A.4, as I have it, this is the section of the memo that starts to deal with the issues about coal quality, because that's in the penultimate paragraph. As I have it, you say there, since the inception of this contract and up to 21 October, there have been close to 150 stockpiles created at Fantine Colliery. Of these 150 stockpiles, around 29 failed to meet the coal quality specification. If you were going to deal with the audit, is it fair to say this is where it should have come in the internal memo?
Yes.
And yet you decided not to include your concerns about its cancellation?
Yes.
That paragraph concludes with the following. This number of stockpiles failing seems unusual. And on 22 October, Eskom reallocated the analyses on the payment sample to the coal laboratory at Kendal Power Station. You see that?
Yes.
Tell me how you came to learn that the coal quality was now going to be tested at Kendal Power Station.
Chair, I received a letter that was signed by the then Head of Technical Services, just indicating that the service from SABS Laboratory has been terminated and that the analysis will now be done at Kendal Laboratory.
Is Kendal Laboratory an accredited laboratory in accordance with the coal supply agreement?
No, it does not comply to the ISO standard.
So were you concerned to learn that a laboratory that wasn't accredited was now going to be testing the quality of coal from Fantine?
I was concerned with it. I do recall having a discussion about it with the Head of Technical Services as well as with our GM, Mr. Mazibuku, at the time. And we were informed prior to this change that Mr. Koukos had a view of changing the payment point for the coal supply agreements to be at the power station, meaning that at the power station one will analyze the coal and then make payment based on those quality parameters that was reported. And we felt that this was maybe moving in line with that strategy, if I can say it. The second thing is that at this moment in time, we came through a process where we had a number of stockpiles failing, we had different laboratories analyzing coal giving different results. And for us as the Eskom team, it gave some sense of comfort to know that this coal will now be analyzed internally to Eskom. So the alleged tampering with results or tampering with samples and all those things would have been something from the past, because now it will be, it's my colleague, it's my brother that's looking after my interest now. We working for the same organization. I would like to believe that there must have been more reluctance on the mine side to accept it, because one could argue that how independent is this laboratory at Kendal now. So for us as the coal management team, even though it came through a way where Mr. Magwaza just informed us that this is the way that it will be done, in a way we felt comfortable with it because it was now done in-house, if I can say it like that.
But it was in breach of the agreement.
Yes, it was.
And
it was not independent, pardon me.
Well, it's not only wasn't independent, it wasn't accredited.
Correct, yes. My understanding at the moment in time was that the coal analysis from Brakfontein will go to Kendal Laboratory. Kendal Laboratory will only split the sample, and then that sample will be analyzed at Duva Power Station, at the laboratory at Duva Power Station, and that laboratory was ISO compliant. Was
that set out in the instruction?
It was not set out in the letter from Mr. Magwaza, but we did have a meeting at the power station with the responsible team on the 28th, where we discussed this, and it was made clear that that is the way that it will happen, yes.
But formally, it was going to an unaccredited laboratory, is that correct?
For the sample preparation, yes. But the analysis done at Duva Power Station was done through an accredited laboratory.
No, Mr. Opperman, let's go back a moment. As I understand the instruction, it was that the analysis was going to be done at Kendal. That is what Mr. Magwaza has told us in an affidavit before this commission. We can go to it.
Okay.
So the instruction on the 21st of October was that Kendal would be doing the analysis going forward of coal from Brakfontein. Is that consistent with your recollection?
I don't have the content of that letter exactly, but if that is what is shared, then I can go with that. My understanding, and if I say my understanding, it was the understanding of me as well as my technical team that accompanied me to Kendal Power Station on the 28th, was that it was clear that only the sample preparation will be done at Kendal and that the analysis will be done at Duva Laboratory. So that was our understanding.
Have you subsequently learned whether that analysis was done at Duva or at Kendal?
I have subsequently learned that I don't think it was done at either of those two.
Where do you understand that it was done?
At a laboratory called UAS. And this I'm saying from third-party information, it's not something that I have.
Okay, so let's just be clear about what we do know. We do know that on the 21st of October, an instruction was given to test coal from Brakfontein going forward under this contract at the Kendal Laboratory. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that the Kendal Laboratory was not accredited, nor was it independent?
Correct.
And yet, did you do anything about that?
Other than escalating it and talking to my seniors about it, no, there was no formal action taken. As I say, we met with the team on the 28th to ensure that they are compliant to the procedure in the CQMP in terms of the reporting of the results and all of that. There has been gap analysis done in terms of what need to be compliant with. Multiple efforts were made to do audits on the laboratory at Kendal. Those were the things that we did, yes.
But at the time it was not accredited?
No, it wasn't.
If we go over the page to 824 capital A.5, can you just tell us what that letter is?
This is a letter from Mr. Nube, dated the 26th of October, addressed to Mr. Jakru, and this now formally cancels that independent audit that we tried to achieve on the letter that was dated the 7th of October.
Thank you. And that follows, as I have your evidence, your email which referred to a postponement.
Correct.
We do not have that email. Is that something you can provide to us in due course?
I can.
Thank you.
So the email that you sent and this letter from Mr. Ncube, are they talking to the same thing?
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
And then if we go over the next...
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. I'm wondering why Mr. Ncube may have considered it necessary to send this letter cancelling the audit if he knew you had already sent an email cancelling it, or had you not sent the one cancelling it, you had only sent the one postponing it?
Chair, no, I did send 2 emails, the first one postponing it and the second one cancelling it.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Ncube was merely trying to close the loop with a formal communication from his letter dated the 7th.
Okay, all right, thank you.
If you can then go over the page to 824A.6. This is also an email train, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you please tell us the context for and background to this interaction?
Chair, so this incident is similar to the previous incident on the 7th of September, if I recall. Yes, that's correct. Where a stockpile is out of specification. It's again out on the top size. This time it's out by 0.9%, so the 5% rejection limit is 5.9%. All other parameters is all within limits and it is fine. I again get a phone call from Mr. Roux requesting to dispatch the stockpile. This time it's much easier for him because he just tells me you did it the previous time, so why don't you do it again? I again tell him that I cannot authorize it and he cannot move that stockpile. Soon thereafter, again, I get the phone call from Mr. Koukos requesting me to engage the power station and to seek acceptance. I again consulted with Mr. Ncube and he again proposed that I follow the instruction. This time around, the approval does not come that easy. In fact, what happens is that...
The approval by who now?
By the power station.
Oh, okay.
Or the acceptance. Let me say the acceptance.
Okay. With the first one, I don't know if I missed it, but my recollection was you spoke to whoever you spoke to in the power station and you said he understood what you were conveying quite
Correct.
Clearly. But you are saying ultimately the power station accepted the coal.
That's correct.
On the first occasion.
Correct.
This time you say acceptance didn't come easily.
It does not come easily.
Yeah, tell us more about that.
With the previous incident, I take it that the coal manager did engage his team on site, whoever he engaged with, but an answer came quickly, if I can say it like that. This time around, the coal manager engaged the general manager of the power station, Mr. McQuay. Mr. McQuay phones me inquiring about what's happening. So now I've explained this whole thing to the coal manager. Now the GM phones me and he asks me what's happening. And he ultimately do not phone my senior, but he phones the SGM at that time, which was Mr. Masego. And they even have a consultation amongst one another. Ultimately, I do get an approval that this stockpile can be shipped, and it is followed up with an email. And on this very same page, right at the top, one can see the email from Mr. McQuay, at that moment in time, the general manager or the power station manager of the power station, where he makes a comment where he says, "Hi all, I suppose this is the end of this coal." So I think from that statement, one can sense the level of frustration around what is happening. So this is again a stockpile that's out on top size which ultimately the station gives permission for, and the coal gets released to be moved.
So, what you did in regard to this occasion was exactly the same as what you had done in regard to the first occasion, is that right?
Correct, Chair.
Both in terms of getting a call from Mr. Koukos and speaking to your senior, Mr. Ngube, and speaking to Mr. Roux. Is that right?
Mr. Ngube, correct, yes.
No, you spoke to Mr. Ngube?
Yes.
And then speaking to the power station?
That's correct, to the coal manager at the power station.
Yes. The only difference is simply that the acceptance from their side didn't come easily this time.
Correct.
And then there was the involvement this time of more people, isn't it?
That's correct. So the coal manager engaged the power station manager, or the GM, Mr. McQuay, and he then also had an engagement over this period with Mr. Mashego at that moment in time. So the previous time it was sort of dealt with at a level above me, and this time it is clear that it's now going to a level even beyond that.
But ultimately it was accepted.
Correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Did Mr. McQuay remain as the manager at Majuba much beyond this?
No, ma'am.
Why was that?
I can't say. I don't know.
I would
You don't know, or you mean you don't know why, or you do know why, but you...
No, I really don't know, Chair. I really
don't know. You don't know why.
I don't know if Mr. McQuay
Yeah.
resigned or what he does.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I'd like to just close off an aspect we were discussing previously about the Kendall Laboratory. I indicated to you that we'd received an affidavit before the Commission that made it clear that the analysis of the samples was going to take place at Kendall. I'd like to just draw your attention to that. And Chair, it's in the same file at page 505. It is an attachment to the affidavit of Mr. Magwaza, to whom you made reference earlier, Mr. Opperman. And it is the letter that he indicates he was instructed by Mr. Koukos to send out. And if we read 505, it's a letter from Mr. Magwaza to Mr. Roux at Brac. And if you wouldn't mind just reading into the record what the letter says.
The content of the letter. This letter serves to inform you that PED has appointed Kendall Power Station Laboratory as a contractual lab to analyze your coal samples from 21 October 2015. This is an initiative to improve our pre-certification process. You are welcome to contact me to discuss this.
So there's no suggestion there that anyone other than Kendall is going to be doing this analysis, correct?
That's correct.
And you wouldn't have been satisfied, would you, with Kendall doing the analysis?
No, because it is not compliant, no.
Right. Mr. Opperman, I'd then like to take you to 2016, because in the middle of that year, it seems from some of the records the Commission has obtained that possible coal mining of the extension at Brac was coming online. Is that consistent with your knowledge?
That's correct.
If we go to page 824.7, which is a few pages after that email we were just on. Can you please tell us what this document is?
Chair, this is a combustion test report that is done at our research, testing and development facility. The same report that we spoke about earlier, that is the combustion report that precedes any coal contracting.
Right, and what coal source is being tested here?
the title of the...
I'm sorry, I just want to double check that I'm on the right page. Did you say 824.7?
Sorry, no, 0.7. So if you
824?
0.7.
Okay, I think I'm in the right place, okay.
It's headed Sustainability Division, Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Opperman, I just asked you what coal source was being tested here?
Chair, under the title that is clarified as the Braakfontein Extension Open Cast Coal Assessment.
So for laymen, this is coal coming from Braakfontein Extension,
That's
correct?
correct, that's correct.
If you'll go over to the conclusion of the document, which you'll find at 824.13. Could I ask you please to first read for us what the conclusion is, and then possibly assist those of us who are not coal experts with some explanation of it. If you'll begin with the conclusion.
So point number 5 is the conclusion in the report. It reads, Braakfontein Extension box cut sample was comparable mineralogical and combustion properties as the previous Braakfontein S4U, S4L, that is for seam 4 upper and seam 4 lower blends, and again S4U and S4L samples analyzed. Partial devolatilization of Braakfontein Extension has increased the burnout time, and the elevated proportion of pyrite could severely influence the total sulfur content. Borehole data and information is required before procuring Braakfontein Extension for any power station.
Mr. Opperman, I read that to say Eskom should not take coal from the extension for any power station until more data and information is obtained. Is that a fair understanding of what is said there?
That is correct.
And it's quite specific. It says it shouldn't be taken for any power station. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And is this the document that Eskom would rely on in order to determine whether it wanted to source coal from the Braakfontein Extension?
Yes, correct.
There's no other source of this information within Eskom?
No, Chair, this is it.
Is it in effect a combustion report?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay.
Are you aware that shortly after this report from the technical division was produced, Eskom sought to extend the coal supply agreement with Braakfontein to take coal from the extension?
Chair, I was aware of engagements. Those engagements happens in the fuel sourcing department. I was aware that there was engagement around additional coal, but as for the detail of it, I was not aware of it.
Okay, I'd like to take you to the documents that reflect the request that Eskom had to make to National Treasury in order to extend the contract. But I'd just like to orientate ourselves in the evidence that's already been received. Chair, you'll recall that in April 2016, National Treasury issued a circular that we looked at previously, which provided that any amendments to existing agreements above 15% of the value would have to be approved by Treasury. We saw that in the course of Mr. Mashigo's evidence. And so the need for this approval to be obtained from National Treasury was a product of that. And the letter that goes to National Treasury occurs in August of 2016. And you'll find that at 833.1.
Yes, got it.
Have you seen this letter before, Mr. Opperman?
No, Chair.
As I have it, this is a letter from the Chief Procurement Officer, Mr. Mabelani, to the Chief Director of Supply Chain Management, Governance, Monitoring and Compliance in National Treasury. It's dated the 19th of August 2016, and it refers to the very note that I've referenced, Chair, about requiring approval for variations of existing contracts. And if we go over the page, you'll see the submission that was presented to Treasury in order to seek its approval. Mr. Opperman, from this document at 833.2, can you tell us in that first table on the page what the value was going to be of this approval that was sought in the line item referred to as second addendum?
It's 2.9 billion rand.
2.9 billion rand.
Correct.
And what does that constitute as a percentage increase over the existing value of the Brac-Fantine contract?
According to the comment in that table, it constituted 77.42% increase.
Thank you. And then what I'm particularly interested in is what appears at paragraph 2.2.3 of that page. Will you read out what Eskom was telling National Treasury in this paragraph of the letter?
Item 2.2.3, the supplier has commissioned the Brac-Fontein Colliery extension and is ready to supply coal from the source. Eskom has since validated the reserve base in the Brac-Fontein Colliery extension and has confirmed that the offer from the supplier meets its coal quality and quantity requirements for the duration of the coal supply agreement.
Is that true?
Not according to my knowledge, no.
Is it consistent with the technical report that Eskom received 2 months earlier from its technical division?
No.
I'd also like to go through a few other aspects of this submission to National Treasury. For that purpose, I need to go back to some of the internal documents that were presented to the board tender committee in order to seek approval for this extension of the agreement, so that approval could then be sought from National Treasury for it. And what I'm interested in there is page 831, which is a few pages back in that file.
(831)
Correct. The document, Chair, just to orientate you, actually begins at 829. So this is a document, as I have it, to the board tender committee, dated 8 August 2016, and it's prepared by Mr. Ngube, is that correct, as the compiler, if you go to page 829?
That's correct, Chair.
Would Mr. Ngube have known that the technical report of 2 months earlier had advised that no power plant of Eskom's should yet take coal from the Brac-Fontein extension?
Chair, it's pretty standard procedure to consider the combustion report before contracting, so I would like to think that he would have known. What's also of interest is that this is the same Mr. Ngube to whom I reported at some stage, but in this capacity he has now moved to the fuel sourcing division. He is no longer in coal operations.
Thank you. If we go to page 831, you'll see at the top of that page a cost comparison of coal being delivered to Majuba. As I read this document, it is included in the submission to the board tender committee because some motivation is being made for procuring 10.8 million tons of coal from Brac-Fontein extension as opposed to other suppliers. Is that a fair reading of this document?
That's correct.
If you go to that table at the top of 831, what you'll see there is a comparison is made between some of the suppliers who were delivering coal to Majuba. And you'll see in that table that Taketa, Brac-Fontein, is identified twice in that table. Once because of rail as the mode used, that's in the second line of the table, Chair, and then at the bottom, Brac-Fontein Road, because that was the second mode of transport used. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then will you please read for us what the bottom of that table reflects about this analysis that was done?
The cost comparison above indicates that delivered price paid for Braakfontein coal by a rail is in line with supplies going into Majuba, while by road it is marginally on the high side.
Okay, well, let's look at those delivered coal prices. If you look at the rail column, at least line, for Braakfontein, what is its delivered coal price?
523 rand 3 cents, 523.03.
And what is the delivered road price?
586 rand 47 cents.
And of the suppliers who are reflected in that table, how does Braakfontein's road price compare to the other suppliers?
It's about 3 rand more than the second highest.
So it's the most expensive.
It's the most expensive.
This is August of 2016. What method of transport was Braakfontein using mainly to get coal to Majuba? Was it by road or was it by rail?
The original plan intended it to be more via rail than via road, but in reality what has happened was a 50-50 split, or in this stage it was more on road than on rail.
How much more?
About a third on the road, and a third on rail and 2/3 on the road.
So you actually have to read this table, I would suggest, by appreciating that the majority of the coal from Braakfontein extension is going to come via road at that stage. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it is the most expensive source of coal compared to this table.
Correct.
And despite that, this was the source that was identified for another 10.8 million tons of coal. Is that correct?
Yes.
At a value of about 2.9 billion.
Yes.
Were you involved in this decision making at all to select Braakfontein extension for this further coal source?
No, not at all.
I'd then like us to move to the follow-up to the June technical report, because you'll recall, Chair, that the June technical report concluded on the basis that more borehole data and information was required before any coal was taken from the extension to a power plant. If we can go to 834.1, that, as I have it, is the next technical assessment of the Braakfontein extension.
What was the date of the other one, if you remember?
June 2016.
Okay, thank you.
So just to get the chronology right, June 2016, the technical department advises not to take coal from the extension. In August of 2016, the board tender committee is asked to approve, nonetheless, an extension to the existing contract to take 10.8 million tons more coal from the extension, and a representation is made to National Treasury that all is fine and well if we take this coal from the extension because it's passed our technical analysis. I'd like to see what happens in November 2016 when that coal is again tested. And that is the document, Mr. Opperman, as I have it at 834.1. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Can you just confirm that it relates to the extension again?
Yes, Chair, on that page 834.1, the title is Braakfontein Extension, Open Cost Coal Assessment.
Thank you. And then if you go to 834.9, that contains the conclusion again. And if you'll tell us what was concluded by Eskom's technical team at that stage.
So I'll read item number 6, conclusion, recommending Braakfontein extension for Majuba, the Tuka and Matla power station, based on the borehole data provided, is not advisable. If Eskom is already contractually obliged to take this coal, then PD must expect pre-certified stockpiles to exceed Majuba dry base as, calorific value, total sulfur, and probably abrasive index. This contract has to be carefully managed to mitigate the risk of contractual disputes and Majuba Power Station stopping delivery of the coal.
Ms. Opperman, I'm interested in that second sentence that starts, if Eskom is already contractually obliged to take this coal. I want to ask you a few questions about that, because my understanding is that Eskom ought not to be contractually obliged to take coal until its technical department has told it that its coal will meet the requirements of a power plant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So why would the technical department be saying if Eskom is already contractually obliged to take this coal?
Chair, I've got no idea why this is put into this report. I can speculate that they maybe had line of sight or have been informed about some negotiations or something. I don't know. I can only speculate.
But that would be irregular, would it not?
Correct, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Opperman, there are two further aspects that I'd like to deal with in your evidence. The first is the Fundudzi report, because the Fundudzi report made a finding against you in relation to your management of the Brac Fantine contract, and I would like to ask you for your comment on that finding. You will find the report in the 5th file, so Exhibit U4, File 5, and if you go to page 1199 of that file,
will you please make sure that somebody ensures that the files are appropriately marked in terms of what exhibits they are? The only file that I have here that refers to 5. You said 5.
yes, so it's Exhibit U4, but File 5 of Exhibit U4.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, now I see there's the one that is marked like that, but there is another one simply marked Volume 5, and I think that was causing confusion.
Indeed.
And it has no indication what exhibit it is. Right. So it's very important to know what exhibit number all the files are. But
certainly.
It's just causing confusion because it's got 5, but I've got the right one. Exhibit U4, File 5.
And the relevant finding in that report, Chair, is at page 1199.
Double 199.
Correct.
Okay.
This is a section of the Fundudzi report which commences at page 1114. Chair, we looked at this report in the earlier evidence of Mr. Mushy at portions of it, but the relevant part on this page, 1199, is towards the bottom at paragraph 6.14.38.9.
Yes.
That paragraph, Mr. Opperman, is dealing in a section of the report with non-compliance with drainage test requirements. You'll see that as the heading on the page. And what Fundudzi determines in this paragraph from a review of the minutes of the monthly technical liaison meetings is that the CSA, that's the coal supply agreement, was a standing agenda item on the previously mentioned meetings. They say, we however noted that contrary to the above assertion by Opperman, issues of non-compliance with clause 22.10 of same were never discussed in any of the said meetings. Mr. Opperman, there's a lot going on in that paragraph. Let's start with clause 22.10. What does that clause deal with in the contract?
It deals with a drainage test that needs to be conducted on this contract within 30 days from commencement date.
And as I read the finding here, Fundudzi is finding that, contrary to your assertion that this issue had been taken up at the monthly technical liaison meetings, they say the item was never discussed. Is that as you understand their finding?
That's how I understand it.
And what is your response to that?
It is false. I did discuss it. Chair, our first meeting, monthly liaison meeting that was held on this contract was held on the 13th of May, and it will reflect on deliveries that happened in April. Advocate Hofmeyer, I don't know if it's an attachment to the...
It is. Let me assist you. If you go to file 4, back where we were, you'll find the relevant minutes that you're looking for at page 804.1.
.804.1.
Correct. Can you take us through what that document is, Mr. Opperman?
So, Chair, this is the minutes that is compiled by myself. As I indicated, this is the first meeting under this contract held on the 13th of May. I think there is a lot of administrative recording, so if we can page 3 pages to page 804.4, subsection 10, deals with the abbreviation CQMP, which is the Coal Quality Management Procedure.
I'm sorry, you said we turn to page?
804.4.
Okay.
Item number 10, the heading is CQMP.
Yes.
And then the second bullet that's noted there deals with this assertion, and here it stated that the drainage test date need to be scheduled.
Now, Fundudzi found that that item was not included in the monthly technical liaison meetings. But as we have it from this document, it was included. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it was also included in subsequent meeting minutes.
However, it doesn't reflect compliance with the clause, does it?
No, it doesn't. At this moment in time, it still indicates that the test need to be done.
Correct. Do you have any other comment to make in relation to the Fundudzi report?
No, I think it is fine. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Opperman, were you invited to attend any events by Taketa during your management of this contract?
Yes, Chair, I was.
What event was that?
It was an event of the media, I think ANN7 or something like that. I can't recall exactly what it was.
And do you recall when the invitation was?
No, I can't.
And did you accept the invitation?
No, I did not.
Why not?
I don't attend things like this with suppliers. I don't need to go there. It's not work related.
Thank you. Mr. Opperman, I've come to the end of the series of questions on the Fantine contract. However, in due course, we will be making submissions to the chair in relation to this contract. And so I would like to give you an opportunity to comment on some of those submissions, insofar as you may wish to differ from what appears to be disclosed in the evidence that we've heard thus far. Chair and Mr. Opperman, we will submit in due course that Eskom was compromised as a consequence of entering into this agreement with Taketa for the Fantine coal. And it was compromised in 3 respects, and I'd like your comment on those 3. Mr. Mushy gave evidence that as a consequence of Taketa going into business rescue in February 2018, Majuba lost 24 days of coal in relation to its stock reserves. And we will submit that that is an instance of the respect in which Eskom was compromised as a result of entering into this agreement. Do you have a comment on that?
I support it.
We will also submit that as a consequence of this contract, Eskom probably received out of specification coal to Majuba from Fantine. Do you have a comment on that?
I think a lot of analysis were done over the life of this contract to ascertain if that is what has happened. What has subsequently came to evidence is that it most probably did. So I need to support it, yes.
We will also submit that without the Fantine contract, there would have been no optimum contract with Taketa. And the reason for that is that the final condition that had to be met by the 13th of April 2016 in order for Taketa to take over Optimum Coal Mine was a payment of 600 million odd that had to be paid into the trust account held by the business rescue practitioners. That we know from what happened around that prepayment came from the Fantine contract. So would you accept a conclusion that said without Fantine there would not have been an optimum in the hands of Taketa?
Chair, most probably yes, or other creative payments would have been sought. But at that moment in time, this was the only vehicle where funds could have flown to Taketa was the Fantine contract, so that's correct.
And Mr. Opperman, we will also submit in due course that Taketa was unduly favoured in the implementation of this contract. The first example of that is that there was no successful combustion test completed before 4 o'clock on the 21st of March, 31st of March 2015. Do you have a comment on that?
No, that's true.
Failed stockpiles from Fantine were allowed to be delivered to Majuba. Do you accept that that indicates a favoured position for Taketa in relation to this contract?
I do accept it, but as I have clarified at the time, the results that was shared with the team showed that the coal was within specifications. We've later learned that that might not have been the case.
We might be missing each other. You told us about 2 incidents in September and in November where coal that did not meet the requirements of the contract were nonetheless delivered to Majuba.
Correct.
We will argue in due course that that constitutes favourable treatment to Taketa. Do you accept that?
Correct.
We will also submit in due course that Eskom misrepresented to National Treasury when it sought to motivate for the approval of the extension of the contract with Taketa, that the coal from the extension complied with the requirements of Majuba Power Plant. Would you agree with that submission?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Opperman. Should the need arise, you will be asked to come back, but for now you are excused.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, we have about half an hour before the lunch break, and we do have our next witness available. So if it suits you, I'd suggest that we call him now to give evidence.
Yes, if he's available, let's use this time before 1 o'clock. Which of these files will I still need for purposes of the next witness?
Chair, the bad news is all of them, but we're going to begin with file 3, which contains Mr. Bester's statement. Okay. So it's Exhibit U4, file 3.
Yes. The registrar, please administer the oath or affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Johann Andries Bester?
Do you have any objections to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes, I do.
Do you swear that the evidence you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bester, just to orientate you, you have a set of files next to you. They are exhibits U8, which contains Mr. Opperman's statement. I don't propose to deal with that file in relation to your evidence. And then there are 3 other files, which are identified as exhibit U4. If you take file 3 of exhibit U4 out, I'd like to take you to the 3rd page there. The pagination appears in the top right-hand corner with the appendage Brac. What you have is an insertion at the beginning of the document. So you must page past that a bit and go to Brac 003. That is the first page, as I have it, of an affidavit that you deposed to. Is that correct?
This is my affidavit, yes.
And if you go to page 21, you'll see a signature on that page. Can you confirm whether that's your signature?
That is my signature.
And can you confirm that you deposed this affidavit before a Commissioner of Oaths on the 16th of January 2019, as is reflected in the bottom half of that page?
Yes, I did.
And in so doing, you confirm that the contents of this affidavit were true and correct. Is that
True
correct?
and correct. I have subsequently found some grammatical errors and one factual error.
Well, let's deal with those. Let's go
Before
to...
you do so, Ms. Hofmeyer, for some reason, I don't have the last page. The last page is 18 of 19.
Oh, that must be a printing error. Chair, we will get you a copy of page 19.
Yeah.
Do
Okay.
you then jump to Brac 22?
Yes.
Okay, that must be a printing error. We'll sort that out, if we may, over the break. I'll
Okay.
make sure not to deal in substance with that page
Yeah.
until after the break.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Bester, I'd like to begin with some background information. What position did you hold in Eskom in 2014-2015?
During most of that period, I would have been the general manager for fuel sourcing within Primary Energy.
And who did you report to in that role?
At the beginning of 2014, I was reporting to Mrs. Kiran Maharaj, and probably towards the middle of 2014, July, August, Mr. Mboweni would have been appointed as the acting divisional executive.
And are you still with Eskom?
No.
When did you leave Eskom?
The last day of my physical presence there was the 18th of August 2015.
And what resulted in your departure from Eskom?
Several things. I think at the end of the day, excuse me for being totally honest, Chair, at the beginning
Well, that's what you're supposed to be.
I'm supposed to be. In around about March 2015, my wife told me she would leave me if I didn't leave Eskom. And a lot of things that resulted in me getting to that conclusion.
Was that because there were lots of things that were happening in Eskom that made you unhappy at Eskom, and she was aware of your unhappiness?
She was aware of my unhappiness, and I would bring my unhappiness home.
Okay. Thank you.
When did you give notice that you wanted to resign from Eskom?
That was the 20th of July, the day Mr. Koukos came back from his suspension.
Okay, Mr. Besser, we will go through some detail in the course of your evidence about these events that you describe as unhappy. If I fail to deal with any one of them, I will make a note that we should come back at the end of your evidence to make sure that we haven't missed any of them out.
I also just want to say, Mr. Pester, it may or may not be that those are events that you would have preferred not to have to talk about them because they were not happy events. But I just want you to appreciate that it's very important that I know the full extent of any unhappiness that may have been caused to people within Eskom by certain events. Okay?
Understood, Chair.
Thank you.
If I feel that we haven't gone into those in this sufficient detail, I will bring them up.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Besser, please can you indicate to the Chair what your qualifications are?
I have an engineering degree and a master's in engineering and an MBA.
Mr. Besser, I'd like to just begin with some background to fuel sourcing and how that works within Eskom. We have had some evidence from Mr. Mushy about it, but it's key to understanding your evidence to be able to place it in the context of the role of fuel sourcing and the planning that goes on to ensure that the power plants of Eskom can produce the electricity that the country needs. So I'd like to begin with asking you to give to the Chair a description of how that planning within fuel sourcing works.
Right, so I think Mr. Mushy did explain that we have an integrated planning department that integrates with the generation department, and there's quite a complex spreadsheet, mainly Excel driven, but there is I gather there's a few more programs behind that looks at the burn that Eskom requires, and that, as Mr. Mushy did explain, gets broken down power station by power station. That gets fed into a model, and that predicts, and all the contracts that have been concluded would be in that model, so that model would predict when we would require coal at certain power station. Obviously, that's in quite a level of detail for the next 2 years. And then maybe into 5 years, it's more of a high-level model. And then it even goes as far as predicting what coal we need for the life of power station. But that's in a more generic level. So that informs us what we require and where we need to focus.
So if a supplier of coal doesn't perform in terms of the contract, I imagine that has an impact on the integrated planning. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what would those impacts be? So
maybe, if I don't answer correctly, maybe just repeat the question. I think I've understood it. If the quality being delivered to the power station is of a lower grade than should be supplied, then the power station would require a higher volume of coal to what it was contracted for. So if the calorific value or the energy content, including the volatiles, were lower than what was contracted, then you would have to burn a higher tonnage for the same energy supplied to the grid.
And if there was a supplier contracted for 10 years who couldn't perform after 3 years in terms of the contract, how would that impact the integrated planning?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example where we would have to replace that coal. Yes, so there were contracts, long-term contracts that weren't performing for various reasons, maybe infrastructure development, access to coal, and even delivery constraints. And if that couldn't be managed, we would have to replace that coal from an alternative source.
Because I assume, on the basis of what you've said, that the plan anticipates that contracts will be performed until their conclusion. Is that correct?
Yes.
So a short default on a contract would have a knock-on effect of needing to fill that gap, so to speak, in the integrated plan.
A shortfall, but if you refer to a short-term shortfall, that could often be managed, but a shortfall would have to be replaced from somewhere else.
Thank you. I'd then like to ask you to go to one of the annexures in your statement, which is in file 4 at page 23. It's the first annexure, and it's an organogram of the primary energy structure.
Did you say Exhibit 4, U4?
Exhibit U4 in file 3. I might have said file 4 as I recall.
I think you said 4.
Apologies to...
3 is the one that has got his statement.
Has statement, indeed. And so it's the first of the annexures to the statement that I'm wanting to address at the moment. That you'll find at Brac 023. And what I'm interested in there is the roles of fuel sourcing and coal supply operations in this organogram. Because we've received some evidence this morning from Mr. Opperman about the interface between those two divisions within Eskom. As I understood his evidence, fuel sourcing is responsible for fuel sourcing and negotiating the coal supply agreements. And once those agreements are in place, the coal operations division is responsible for implementing the contract. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that, and there would be a hand at this. Once a contract is concluded, there would be a handover, and the departments involved in that negotiation would hand over to the relevant coal supply manager. So there would be. So it's been mentioned that on this contract, would have been preferred to put this coal on rail. So there would have been an individual from the logistics team, which would discuss that with the coal supply manager. There should be a member from the technical team that would have described to him any technical potential variations with the normal qualities. Those things would have, any differences from a standard contract should have been conveyed to the coal supply manager.
Right, and at the time of negotiating these contracts, I understand from Mr. Mashigo's evidence, there are a number of other divisions feeding into fuel sourcing. Is that correct? Divisions such as technical and legal. Is that the ordinary practice?
We would typically almost have a coordinating role. We would prefer not to start negotiations or commence negotiations unless the environmental, for example, that would probably be one of the first steps. We wouldn't want to put resources aside to negotiate with a supplier unless they had a water use license or were environmentally compliant, had a mining right, for example. So there would be a number of different departments that would potentially be involved before we started negotiations. So we would coordinate in a way that we wouldn't resume negotiations until all of that, we were satisfied that all of that was in place.
Mr. Besser, the Brac-Fantine contract was not a product of an open tender process, was it?
Correct.
And why was that not the case?
We found that the open tender process most often didn't yield us with any new suppliers because the gatekeepers were quite restrictive. So you wouldn't offer coal to Eskom unless you had a water use license, unless you had a mining right. But because we were of the view that by the time Eskom's last power station closes down, we will probably have burnt every single ton of coal that is available in Mpumalanga. We had a pipeline of potentially 50 suppliers at any one time, and we kept quite a good database as to where they were, how they were progressing. And those that were closer to being in a position, the critical part of that would have been a mining right for them to have done sufficient exploration to be able to convey to the technical team what their potential qualities were. So we almost managed, although obviously every miner has to manage themselves, we almost managed that pipeline and focused our attention on those suppliers that were near term.
Mr. Professor, are you aware of Section 217 of the Constitution?
Not, you would have to.
Sure.
It may be familiar to me, but I'm not aware of what the number is.
It's a provision of the Constitution that requires organs of state to procure goods and services in accordance with a competitive, cost-effective, and transparent process. The process that you've described doesn't sound as though it meets that requirement because it's not open and it's not competitive. So if you procure coal in ways other than that which the Constitution requires, how do you ensure that you're getting the best deal for Eskom?
We have, well, Eskom has quite a extensive database in terms of what pricing is available in the market. So we at any one time would be able to look at what other potential suppliers are and what other suppliers that we are negotiating with, and we would choose the best option.
So open procurement was not the norm when you were at Eskom for coal supply?
We did run 2 or 3 open tenders to gather data and to see if there was anybody that would tender that we had missed in the process. What I think the correct number is within the Eskom procurement system. The procurement policy 320 does allow for unsolicited offers.
In what circumstances?
When there is a requirement and the need can be satisfied by that offer.
So the procurement system anticipates that an unsolicited bid is an exception. Is that correct?
The general procurement practice, yes.
But within coal, it sounds like the exception was the norm. Is that fair?
That is because of the so maybe I need to go back a step. When Eskom normally builds a new power station, it does go out on open tender, and there would be several mining companies that would tender for that process, and Eskom would first satisfy itself that that mine is sufficient to supply that power station before building that power station. For example, at the new Kusile power station being built, it would have gone out on tender. There would have been a number of suppliers that tendered to that tendered for that one. As you may know, Anglo American was successful in that tender. The team at the time, this was before my time, would have satisfied themselves that the reserve was large enough to supply a new power station, and for that reason, the power station was located where the successful tenderer was. From round about 2000, and it was probably mainly as a result of the mine supplying the Yuba power station failing, and Dan Mashicha described it, that they tried to get that mine running for about 1.5 years and kept failing. There were geological conditions that the mining company at the time did not foresee. They subsequently, that was almost the start of what was referred to as the medium-term mandate. A special mandate was sought from the board to start supplying power stations on road and on rail, not from dedicated mines. I think that's the key point. So there is a mandate, and I think it's been referred to here a number of times, the 2008 to 2018 mandate, and the subsequent revision thereof to buy coal using that methodology.
Thank you. Mr. Besa, just to confirm, in the course of the engagement, your evidence is actually for the benefit of the chair more than anyone else in this room. So
Yes.
if I may request that you direct your answers to him, I will supply the questions. But Mr. Besa, can we just focus on the medium-term mandate for a moment? You are correct, it has been referred to in the evidence thus far. You will find it in Exhibit U4, File 4 at page 693.
Apologies, mine goes up to 400 and something.
Sorry, so you'll need to be in File 4,
It's probably this one.
and it's
Of Exhibit U4.
of Exhibit U4, indeed, Chair.
And page?
693. Mr. Bester and Chair, I'm conscious of the fact that we're close to the lunch break, but I will just conclude on this point with your leave.
Okay, that's fine.
This is the medium-term mandate. We dealt with it in the evidence of Mr. Mashiho. What's important, given the prior questions that I've asked you, is that this is an exception to the rule that ordinarily procurement must occur in an open, competitive process. Do you accept that?
Correct.
If you go over the page to 694, that is made clear in paragraph 3.1 of the mandate. The first paragraph on that page talks about an emergency being declared at effective power stations on the 9th of January 2008. Were you at Eskom at the time?
No, I was not.
But are you aware of this emergency having been declared?
It's been referred to before, but I'm not specifically aware of it.
As I understand this mandate, it was that emergency that then precipitated the authority given to procure on an unsolicited basis. If you go back the page to 693, up to a particular volume of coal and up to a particular value of contracts. Is that correct?
Correct. That's my understanding why it was promulgated, if that's the right word.
And you'll see that reflected at 2.1 on page 693. The required volume that could be procured in this manner, not pursuant to open competitive tendering, was up to a volume of 490.8 million tons and up to a value of 164,418 million rand. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And then you referenced the fact that this mandate was extended in 2010. For your reference, you'll find that at page 738 of that same file. And just to orientate us, what Mr. Mashiho explained about this extension was that whereas the previous mandate had allowed procurements only between the years of 2008 and 2018, this extension in 2010 allowed contracts to be procured for the life of a mine, as opposed to having to come to an end in 2018. Is that consistent with your understanding of this extension?
Yes, that is my understanding, but I'm not sure that we're on the right page.
The page is at 742 of that document.
Apologies.
Well, I was at 738.
Yes, that's where it starts, Chair. Apologies. And then the relevant clause of the document, I should have mentioned that previously, is at 742.
Okay.
You'll see at the bottom of that page at paragraph 3, what was granted was approval to negotiate and conclude contracts with suppliers for the life of mine that have resources that extend beyond the original mandate period ending on the 31st of March 2018, within the pricing parameters of the approved mandate and Eskom's long-term coal strategy. Is that the clause you were looking for?
Yes, I was maybe trying to refer to a specific clause that says for the life of powers, for the life of mine, but it's mentioned several places in the document.
Yes, paragraph 3 does refer to the life of the mine.
Yes, yes, I see that now. With suppliers for the life of mine that have resources.
Thank you. So when Eskom acts in terms of these mandates, it's not acting according to open competitive processes. It's acting as a consequence of a mandate given arising out of an emergency to ensure coal supply to power stations. Is that accurate?
So my understanding, maybe it's just our interpretation. It's the emergency was referred to give background and context. And I think this, there was no intention for this to be an emergency procurement mandate, but it refers to that and gives it context. And it says going forward, there will be an ongoing requirement. And I think at the time, it was put together very quickly. And when the team that actually dealt with this, the 2010-2018 mandate, the original mandate, as they engaged with suppliers, they realized that there could be 1 or 2 improvements to be made. I would imagine, I can't take credit for it, I wasn't there yet. I had, however, started when this was submitted, but the compilation I can't take credit for. But I do agree with it, that some of the suppliers would have said, we can offer you better terms in terms of rand per ton if we supply you for the life of mine. And the other consideration would have been that if we had, at any time, there would have been about 20 of these contracts in place. If all of these contracts expire on the 31st of March 2018, there would be a massive workload, which probably wouldn't place Eskom in the best position to negotiate.
Thank you. Chair, I'll move on to another topic shortly, if it's convenient to take the lunch adjournment.
Yes, we'll take the lunch adjournment and we will resume at 2. We adjourn.